Concrete buildings are beautiful, but do we look after them with the same amount of care that we give to maintaining buildings made of brick and stone? Many of the concrete buildings that were erected before the 1960s have been refurbished, transformed and reused in the last decennia. They are factories, houses, schools, warehouses. They are sustainable and belong to our heritage. People have learned to respect and to love them. And yet, unnecessary alterations are made to heritage buildings. They are often insensitively reconstructed, and some are even demolished after years of neglect. As members of the CONSECH20 JPI project, we believe that more can be done to sensitively conserve early concrete buildings. CONSECH pleads for the use of technically appropriate conservation strategies to be used on these buildings and wants to see their historic and social values respected. We deal with historic concrete. That is to say, concrete which dates from between the end of the 19th century and the 1960s. This concrete was experimental, both in terms of fabrication and building techniques. Therefore, each old building is unique. We're going to see one of these buildings, which is located in Rotterdam Harbour. This historic building is the San Francisco warehouse of the Holland-America line. When it was built in 1916, it was the largest warehouse in the Netherlands. This is the harbour where the Holland-America line left for New York. Hotel New York and the Holland-America line terminal. These are now surrounded by modern buildings, but they remind us of the history. By 1900, 500,000 people had already left for America.
My father, on the age of 17, as an orphan, he went daily to the harbour of Rotterdam looking for a job on one of the ships of the Holland-American lines. One day he succeeded and arrived in Hoboken, New York. Here is the proof.
The warehouse has suffered from fire and bombing. Its reconstruction in 2 separate parts in 1951 was like a rebirth, hence the name Phoenix. The goods were brought to the warehouse directly by train, which you can see on the left, and from the ships on the right. The Phoenix is currently being restored and will become a modern cultural centre in a modern context, which will look to the future whilst maintaining a strong connection with the past.
After the value assessment, we really looked into the parts that are still original from the 1950s and also the 1920s, when the first building was actually constructed. There's like a very interesting layering of those two time periods also present. We really value this different materials that are still there. So a lot of, like for example, the steel windows, they are kept, restored, but they are actually filled in with monumental glazing, isolated glazing.
The industrial windows are a characteristic feature, but we should be careful when planning interventions to these old historic structures. For example, the calculations used for the load-bearing structure were experimental. The materials, the fabrication techniques used, these were all worked by hand. Mixing by hand and then pouring concrete resulted in an irregular texture with a higher degree of porosity than present-day concrete has. This facilitated the formation of microcracks and the ingress of water. The concrete cover was usually too thin, which in itself led to carbon-induced corrosion. Some of the rebars had rusted, and this had caused the spalling of the concrete cover. Although the concrete was repeatedly plastered in the 1950s as a form of protection and also as an aesthetic finishing, the damage was not stopped.
we did an investigation of all the different types of damages that are visible, and yeah, we documented them. Also, the construction engineer did an investigation of the existing damages to mainly to the concrete construction of the building. And those are actually taken as a base for the contractor, the subcontractor actually, that yeah, will do the further investigation. Also, for example, if you have a crack, is there already corrosion?
Repair the damage, but only what is necessary. Intervene as little as possible. Here, for example, by treating the rust reinforcement and by adding rebars, and by applying a new plaster layer to prevent iron from rusting in the future. Plastering is necessary, but it is important to preserve the original material under the layer. At one time, the Phoenix building was a home for cafes and was much loved by the people of Rotterdam and by the young in particular.
Yeah, it was actually pretty fun because when I was younger and before the building was renovated, I used to come here a lot in the summer, especially to the Phoenix food factory. So I already knew the building. So when I heard I could work on this project, it was very nice to be able to also be a part of the changing.
What will happen to the Phoenix? The existing structure is being preserved. Meanwhile, the central part has created space for a surprise. A spiral stair to give the impression of boarding a ship.
We had to demolish a lot actually, but I think if you demolish something to add something new, so you know about the thing in the steel tornado in the middle for the viewpoint. I think that's something you add to the building, and so you have to demolish some parts for that, of course. But you really add something big, and I think it's a good addition to the building as well, especially because it's a museum. So it should be an addition for everyone in the city.
Keep materials and techniques as witnesses of the past, but adapt the building to present day's needs. Altogether, we are preparing the Phoenix for a new journey. We must preserve what tells the history of the building and change what makes it ready for its new life.